I gasped, feeling the air leave my lungs as I heard Nolan's words through the cracked door of the study. "You're really going to try and get Celeste to quit her precious little design business?" One of his friends snickered. Nolan's voice was smug. "Oh, absolutely. I've got a plan to manipulate her into giving it all up. It'll be easy. She's so insecure about her skills." My heart pounded in my ears as I listened, unable to believe what I was hearing. How could the man I loved, the man I trusted, be betting with his friends to sabotage my career, my life's work? I'll just keep undermining her confidence, making snide comments about her clients and work. Once she's feeling worthless, I'll insist she quits to focus on us. Nolan's words cut like knives. Anger and disbelief surged through me. In that moment, I knew I had to gather evidence of his manipulative scheme. Quietly, I grabbed my phone and started recording the conversation. Over the following weeks, I played along, all the while documenting every demeaning comment, every attempt to tear me down. Nolan grew bolder, openly ridiculing my achievements in front of our families. At one particular gathering, he orchestrated a humiliating scene, berating my work ethic and success. As he continued his diatribe, I calmly pulled out my phone and played the recorded evidence of his initial bet. The look of shock on Nolan's face was priceless as the truth was laid bare. His own parents turned on him, appalled by his deceitful actions. In that moment, I felt a surge of power and clarity wash over me. "I want a separation," I stated firmly, holding up the prenup that protected my business assets. "And I'm taking full control of my company, something you'll never undermine again." Nolan could only sputter in disbelief as the weight of his betrayal finally crushed his fragile ego. For once, I was the one in control of my destiny. In the days following my confrontation with Nolan, a tense silence hung over our home. He sulked around, clearly stung by having his deplorable actions exposed to our families and friends. I could see the anger simmering behind his eyes, but I refused to back down. "You really think you've won, don't you?" He spat one morning as I prepared for a client meeting. "You and your precious little business." I met his glare steadily. "I've done nothing but build something for myself, Nolan. The only one with a problem here is you and your oversized ego." He stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "We'll see how long that attitude lasts when I'm through with you." Over the next few weeks, Nolan's manipulation tactics intensified. Snide comments about my clients and demands became outright insults. He'd linger nearby as I was on video calls, making obnoxious noises to disrupt my professionalism. "Sorry about that, Mrs. Henderson," I said through gritted teeth during one call. "My husband seems to have forgotten how to act like an adult." Nolan just smirked. His most insidious ploy was to plant seeds of doubt among our inner circle. Anytime we were around family or friends, he'd make underhanded remarks about my alleged work obsession or how my business was driving a wedge between us. "Celeste is so consumed by her little projects I hardly see her anymore," he'd lament with feigned sadness. I could see his parents watching us with concerned expressions, clearly being swayed by Nolan's masterful deception. The final straw came at his father's birthday celebration. As we mingled with guests, Nolan stepped up his campaign of humiliation. "In fact, Celeste is so married to her job, we may as well not be married at all," he announced loudly to the room. My face burned with shame and anger as all eyes turned towards us. Before I could respond, Nolan's father chimed in. "Well, son, if her work is such an issue, why don't you insist she give it up? Put your foot down for once." The smug look on Nolan's face said it all. This had been his plan all along, to alienate me from my own support system through careful manipulation. In that moment, I knew I had to act decisively to cut off this toxic cycle once and for all. The tense family gathering droned on as Nolan basked in the smug satisfaction of his father's suggestion that I give up my business. I could feel my heart pounding with a mix of rage and determination. "Well, Celeste," Nolan said with a sickly sweet smile, "what do you say? Are you finally ready to be a proper wife and quit this silly career of yours?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Nolan's mother cut me off with a disdainful sniff. "Honestly, dear, my son is right. This obsession with work has gone on long enough. It's tearing your family apart." A murmur of agreement rippled through our assembled friends and relatives. I scanned their faces, feeling a surge of nausea at their obvious lack of support. How could they all be so blindly taken in by Nolan's manipulation? That's when I remembered. I didn't have to convince them of anything. I already had all the proof I needed of Nolan's despicable intentions in the recordings on my phone. Squaring my shoulders, I pulled out my phone and hit play, amplifying the audio for all to hear. Nolan's smug voice filtered through the speakers, clear as day. I'll just keep undermining her confidence, making snide comments about her clients and work. Once she's feeling worthless, I'll insist she quits to focus on us. A hush fell over the room as the damning recording played out. I watched in grim satisfaction as Nolan's expression morphed from smugness to pure horror. You've been recording me this whole time?" he sputtered as the audio finished. "Every vile word," I stated firmly. "Every effort to tear me down through your petty jealousy and manipulation." I turned to face the shocked crowd. This has all been part of a cruel game for Nolan, a bet to see if he could sabotage my business using underhanded tactics. Well, I'm calling his bluff right here and now. Nolan tried to interject, but I silenced him with a raised hand. "Our marriage has been built on a foundation of lies and contempt from you, Nolan. I'm done letting you trample my self-worth." Drawing myself up, I looked him square in the eye. "I want a separation, immediately, and I'll be taking full control of my business assets, as clearly outlined in the prenup you so arrogantly insisted upon." A collective gasp went up from our friends and family as the truth finally became inescapable. Nolan opened and closed his mouth like a gasping fish, unable to formulate a response in the face of his exposed treachery. As I strode from the room, I heard his father's gruff voice behind me. "You've been a damned fool, son, a fool." For the first time in years, I felt completely free from Nolan's twisted games, free to soar with the career I had worked so hard to build. The road ahead may have been rocky, but I knew in that moment I had the strength to face any challenge head-on. The deafening silence that lingered in the wake of my public revelation was broken only by the thud of Nolan dropping heavily into a chair. His face was ashen, a look of utter disbelief etched across his features. You can't be serious, Celeste," he finally choked out. "A separation? Over this?" I leveled an icy glare at him. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences for your reprehensible behavior? For treating me as some vapid trophy wife instead of an equal partner?" Nolan swallowed hard, his arrogance finally wavering. But we've built a life together. Surely you don't want to throw that all away?" "You're the one who gambled that life away, Nolan, with your fragile ego and your sad little bet to undermine everything I've worked for." Around us, our friends and family watched the unfolding scene in stunned silence. A few exchanged awkward glances, clearly regretting their blindly taking Nolan's side before the truth came out. Sensing his control over the situation rapidly slipping, Nolan switched tactics, his expression morphing into one of pleading desperation. "Celeste, please. I was wrong, okay? Just wrong, but you have to understand, I did it because I love you. I didn't want to lose you to your work." I scoffed loudly at his pathetic attempt to play the victim card. "You can drop the act, Nolan. We both know your issues have nothing to do with me and everything to do with your own insecurities." Turning away from him, I addressed the rest of the stunned gathering. "I appreciate that some of you may have been misled by Nolan's lies up until this point, but I can no longer stay in this toxic situation." With a deep breath, I steeled my nerves. "Which is why I'm informing you all that I'll be pursuing a legal separation effective immediately. And per the prenuptial agreement Nolan was so insistent on, I'll be retaining full ownership rights over my business and assets." A collective gasp went around the room, but I pressed on, facing Nolan directly. "This was your grand design all along, to manipulate me into giving up my life's work for your own selfish benefit. Well, consider your plan an utter failure." Nolan's face contorted with rage as my words hit home. You ungrateful bee." "I'd watch your language if I were you," a gruff voice interrupted. We turned to see Nolan's father glaring at him with undisguised contempt. "Your mother and I clearly failed in raising you to be a man of honor and integrity." His mother remained silent, but the disappointment and shame were evident on her face. As the weight of his failures crashed down upon him, Nolan could only sputter incoherently. In that moment, whatever twisted power he thought he had over me fully evaporated like a puddle in the sun. Squaring my shoulders, I swept from the room, finally feeling the burden of years of emotional abuse and manipulation lifting away. My future was my own to define now, and I had no intentions of letting anyone ever threaten that again. In the days following my explosive separation from Nolan, the gossip mill in our close-knit community kicked into high gear. News of his despicable behavior and the secret recordings I had exposed spread like wildfire. Whenever I ventured out, I could feel the weight of judgmental stares and whispered conversations. Some looked at me with pity, while others regarded me with a newfound sense of respect for standing up to such blatant manipulation. Nolan, on the other hand, wasn't faring nearly as well in the court of public opinion. "Did you hear about what that scumbag Nolan did to his wife?" I overheard one neighbor loudly proclaim while I was out for my morning jog. As the sordid details continued circulating, Nolan's reputation in our community took a beating. Longtime friends and social acquaintances began actively shunning him in public spaces. In a twisted way, I almost felt bad for the self-inflicted pariah status he had brought upon himself through his own arrogance and cruelty. Almost. While Nolan retreated into sullen isolation, I refused to simply become a victim twice over. I channeled my energy into turning the spotlight on the broader issue of manipulative relationships and the often insidious ways they can erode one's sense of self-worth. Using my graphic design skills, I created hard-hitting visuals and social media campaigns to raise awareness. I shared the story of my own emotional journey, how I had initially felt so beaten down by Nolan's mind games that I nearly gave up on myself and my passions. The response from other survivors of similar situations was overwhelming and humbling. What began as a few supportive comments and personal messages soon snowballed into a torrent of people finding inspiration in my truth-to-power stance against manipulation. It was both energizing and vindicating to see so many others boldly sharing their stories and offering words of encouragement and solidarity. In standing up for myself, I had inadvertently sparked a larger community dialogue. Of course, not everyone was pleased with the growing movement I had tapped into. More than once, I crossed paths with Nolan in the frozen food aisle of our local grocery store, his eyes boring into me with a mixture of residual anger and unease. "Enjoying your little revenge tour?" he spat under his breath during one such encounter. I simply regarded him with calm defiance. "I'm doing what you could never comprehend. Nolan, using my skills and voice for a productive purpose beyond selfishly tearing others down." As I walked away, I could feel his heated glare scorching the back of my neck. But I refused to be cowed any longer. The shackles of fear and insecurity he had tried to bind me with were finally shed for good. With each small victory, a meaningful connection made, an impactful design launched, a life impacted. I felt more emboldened and secure in the new path my life was taking. Nolan's twisted gambits were rapidly becoming irrelevant footnotes in my story of empowerment. I was enjoying a late breakfast at my favorite local cafe when a figure approached my table, casting a large shadow across my plate of avocado toast. Looking up, I felt my body tense as I met Nolan's sunken, desperate gaze. "We need to talk," he stated flatly, making no effort to disguise the bitterness in his voice. I regarded him coolly, unfazed. "I think we've said quite enough to each other, don't you?" Nolan glanced around furtively before pulling out the chair opposite me and taking a seat uninvited. Up close, I could see his grooming had become increasingly sloppy, his hair disheveled, bags under his eyes. "Please, Celeste," he began, an uncharacteristic tremor in his voice. "This has all gone too far. The things being said about me around town, the way people look at me with such disdain." He trailed off, dragging a hand down his face warily. For just a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something resembling pity for the pathetic shadow of a man sitting before me. But the feeling was short-lived, as I remembered the immense pain and humiliation he had so calculatingly inflicted upon me for his own selfish desires. My jaw tightened. "You've only yourself to blame for the effects of your cruelty being made public, Nolan. Did you honestly expect there wouldn't be any consequences for your deplorable actions?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off sharply. "Let's get one thing straight. I don't owe you a damn thing, least of all a second chance at manipulating and demeaning me further." I leaned in closer, holding his gaze fiercely. "We're through. Irrevocably. Nolan's face flushed red with anger and hurt pride. "Is that so?" he hissed. "Well, we'll see how that ridiculous ego of yours holds up when I start systematically dismantling your precious business from the outside." I couldn't stifle the derisive snort that escaped my lips at the transparent attempt at intimidation. "What? You'll badmouth me on Yelp or something? Please don't flatter yourself." "Mark my words," Nolan seethed, stabbing a finger towards me aggressively. "If you won't hear me out and make things right, I'll make it my life's mission to bury your little passion project through any means necessary." In that instant, the pitiful figure he had initially presented melted away, replaced by the ugliness of pure, unbridled malice I had come to know so well. Rather than cowing me, his vile threats only strengthened my resolve. "Do your worst, Nolan," I stated plainly, staring him down. "I've already emerged victorious by stripping away the lofty pedestal you so arrogantly placed yourself upon at my expense." His face contorted with ire as my words hit home. With a noise that was half growl, half whimper, he abruptly stood and stormed away, knocking over a chair in his wake. As the clattering echoed through the hushed cafe, I felt the eyes of the other patrons upon me, with expressions ranging from shock to awe. But I simply sat back calmly and returned my attention to my now lukewarm breakfast, energized by the knowledge that no matter how vehemently Nolan lashed out, he would never regain the power he had so ruthlessly wielded before. The world was watching his downfall unfold, just as it had borne witness to my long-awaited rise from the ashes of oppression. And I had no intentions of squandering this hard-won freedom by entertaining his desperate pleas and vile threats. A hush fell over the crowded community center as I stepped up to the podium, carefully arranging my notes. The murmurs of the assembled crowd faded into an expectant silence as I cleared my throat and looked out over the sea of faces. "Thank you all for coming tonight to discuss the upcoming revitalization efforts for our downtown corridor," I began, my voice ringing out clearly. "But before we dive into those plans, there's an important issue I feel compelled to address." In the back row, I noticed Nolan skulking in, his expression darkening as our eyes met briefly. I steeled myself, refusing to be thrown off course. "Many of you are likely already aware of the personal struggles my family has been enduring as of late," I continued carefully. "What began as a sad situation of infidelity and manipulation has escalated to the point of harassment and threats against my livelihood." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience as I let that admission hang in the air for a beat. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Nolan shifting uncomfortably, shooting furtive glances around, as if suddenly regretting his decision to attend. Fixing my gaze at a point just above the crowd, I pressed on. "Those closest to me know that I've worked incredibly hard over the years to build a small but thriving graphic design business from the ground up. It's been my passion, my purpose." I paused, feeling the emotion rising unbidden in my chest. "But recently, an individual who I once trusted, who I once loved." My voice cracked slightly, and I saw a few audience members leaning forward in rapt attention. Gathering myself, I turned to face Nolan's general direction, my expression hardening. "That person has now decided to make undermining my business his sole mission out of pure spite." Nolan's eyes went wide as I aimed my rhetoric squarely at him. Whispers and gasps began to circulate as people caught on to the subtext. "This is a man," I declared firmly, "who has proven himself untrustworthy, manipulative, and willing to go to extremes to salve his own ego, no matter who or what he tries to destroy in the process." My heart was pounding, but I refused to back down from laying everything bare before the community that had embraced and empowered me through this nightmare. "What you all need to understand is that his vendetta runs much deeper than just his anger towards me. No, this is about a systematic campaign to devalue and demean women who dare to find independence and success outside of the tidy boxes his fragile male ego permits." I could see Nolan's face flushing red with anger and embarrassment as my words hit their mark. A few audience members turned in their seats to face him, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright condemnation. Seizing the moment, I drove the point home with full force. "So when you hear the undoubtedly false rumors and allegations he plans to spread in an effort to tarnish my business reputation, I implore you all to consider the source. Look at the man behind the buzzwords like obsessed and family neglector he's sure to wield against me. My voice rose, ringing with well-earned conviction. What you'll find is nothing more than the flailing tantrums of a bully whose misguided sense of male entitlement has been rightfully toppled. I won't be silenced or cowed by his pathetic intimidation tactics, and neither should any of you. The room erupted in raucous applause and cheers of support as I stepped back from the podium, my heart soaring. Nolan shrank back, eyes downcast, clearly realizing his attempt to sabotage me had been utterly reversed. In that electric moment, I knew that no matter what schemes he attempted to cook up, the truth would always hold weight over his empty bravado. My rebirth was complete, and there would be no putting the liberated woman I had become back in her cage. The crisp morning air carried the excited chatter of the crowd that had gathered outside my newly opened design studio. As I stepped through the front door, a roar of cheers and applause washed over me, bringing an unstoppable grin to my face. "Thank you all for coming," I called out, waving to the well-wishers. "It means so much to me to have your support as I start this next chapter." Making my way through the throng, I accepted hearty handshakes and warm hugs from neighbors, former clients, and even complete strangers who had been inspired by my advocacy efforts. The feeling of community acceptance and empowerment was utterly intoxicating. My gaze scanned the crowd, and that's when I spotted him, Nolan lingering towards the back with hunched shoulders and a slack expression. Our eyes met for the briefest of moments before he looked away sharply. Part of me felt a flicker of surprise that he'd even bother showing his face after the complete and utter obliteration of his vindictive smear campaign against me. But another part understood. This was his way of trying to maintain a twisted sense of control, to convince himself that he still mattered. With a slight shake of my head, I turned my focus back towards the positive energy swirling around me. There would be no letting Nolan's impotent, lingering ruin this shining moment. "I have all of you to thank for making today possible," I began, addressing the assembled group. "After everything we've been through, your unwavering support and faith in me has been overwhelming, to say the least." Nodding towards a few tear-stained but smiling faces in the crowd, I pressed on. When I first started speaking out about the manipulation and abuse I had endured, I could never have imagined how many others would find strength and inspiration in my story. You've all lifted me up and emboldened me in ways I'll never forget. A chorus of cheers and clapping rang out in response. Over by the back, I noticed Nolan shift uncomfortably from one foot to the other, clearly ill at ease with the outpouring of support I was receiving. Which is why I've decided to take the next step in not just finding my own voice, but helping amplify others who have struggled under the crushing weight of intimidation and oppression. I swept an arm out grandly, gesturing to the modern studio space behind me. This isn't just going to be a design firm. It's going to be a creative hub, a space for the unheard and the marginalized to tell their stories and connect through visionary art. Together, we're going to reshape the cultural narratives that keep people shackled by fear and insecurity. The cheers and whoops of support swelled around me as I laid out my grand vision. I could feel the electric energy washing over me, propelling me ever further away from the trapped, diminished woman I had once allowed myself to become. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Nolan making a move towards the edges of the crowd, his posture radiating defeat and embarrassment. Pressing my lips into a grim smile, I decided to aim my parting words directly at the shriveled husk of a man he had revealed himself to be. To those who still cling to outdated, toxic notions of using intimidation and control to subjugate others, your age is past. The world is changing, and attitudes rooted in hatred and insecurity towards the empowered will be laid bare for all to see. I held Nolan's gaze steadily as the words hit home. I'm living proof that shining light on patterns of abuse and manipulation robs them of their power. My story doesn't end with me as a victim. It's just getting started. Nolan opened his mouth as if to respond, but quickly thought better of it. With a shake of his head, he turned and began pushing through the crowd towards the exit, leaving only disgusted looks in his wake. As the chants and cheers reached a crescendo around me, I realized chains of subjugation and doubt had finally been shattered into rubble at my feet. This was only the beginning, and I had no intentions of slowing down until every voice joined mine in rising up, loud and defiant.